In the early 1980s, BMW produced their first ever M5. It was a 6-cylinder, 4-door saloon car that produced more power than the latest and greatest Ferrari of the time. The crucial ingredients to the BMW M5 was 4 doors, a boot big enough to put your golf clubs in, enough room inside for 4 of your friends, and a behemoth of an engine under the bonnet. Now, for 2021, and the F90 series, the principles remain the same. Now, the engine that's in the 2021 model of the M5 is a 4.4 litre V8 with a twin-scroll turbo. That produces, believe it or not, 617 brake horsepower and 553 foot-pounds of torque. That's supercar territory. This particular model, the way that it's spec'd, has a regulated, or should I say restricted, top speed of, wait for it, 190 miles per hour. It's a 4-door saloon. So, let's start our little drive with a brief history lesson. The first M5 came along in the form of BMW's E28 5 Series. The motorsport engineers at BMW took what was essentially BMW's big family car and decided to drop in the 3.5 litre straight 6 that they'd previously been using for their supercar, the BMW M1. This feat of engineering unwittingly broke the mould for cars of the era, as suddenly you had the option, in the 1980s, to buy a 4-door family car with 270 brake horsepower. Following the global success of the E28, with the next iteration of the 5 Series came the next M5, the E34 M5. Once again, it was a car that looked like BMW's big family car, only this time it had even more power. The motorsport engineers had once again worked their magic with another hand-built iconic straight 6, and this time had managed to squeeze out 311 brake horsepower from their family car. The late 1990s saw the introduction of what's regarded by many as one of the greatest driver's cars of all time, the E39 M5. In 1998, BMW unveiled their latest iteration of the M5, only this time it had a literal power plant under its bonnet in the form of a 4.9 litre naturally aspirated V8 producing just under 400 brake horsepower. As per the traditions of the M5 to date, BMW's motorsport boffins had created a motorsport engine, paired it with a dynamic chassis and suspension setup, and yet for the average onlooker, it was just another family car. In 2004, the world's motoring press gasped collectively with the announcement of the E60 M5. With its revolutionary or questionable styling, it was one of the most significant talking points of the decade. But people weren't just talking about the way that it looked. As of the mid-noughties, BMW's big family car had suddenly somehow gained a further 100 brake horsepower and 2 more cylinders. The E60, which is frequently referred to as the V10 M5, set the world on fire with its screaming Formula One-derived V10 engine, a blatant disregard for MPG, and a frankly hilarious 500 brake horsepower. The F10 M5 came next in 2011, and you probably won't be too surprised to learn that the power plant had been upgraded once more, only possibly not in the way you'd imagine. The golden era of naturally aspirated V10 engines had now passed, and in its place was a V8 engine once more, only this time it had turbos. This smaller 4.4 litre V8 was a controversial move for the die-hard M fans, but was widely accepted as a necessary evil. Whilst the engine was smaller in capacity and down on 2 cylinders, thanks to the turbos, it was of course more powerful, as BMW's big family car now produced 567 brake horsepower. So here we are in the present day, and the latest iteration of the M5, known as the F90, continues with the 4.4 litre V8 turbocharged power plant, only you guessed it, with more power. Loads more power. The latest UK entry-level M5, which is confusingly named the M5 Competition, has a frankly absurd 617 brake horsepower. In fact, if I was to say to you Audi R8 V10 Plus, or how about Aston Martin DB11, or how about Nissan GTR Nismo Edition, or Porsche 911 Turbo S, that's the really fast one. This thing has more power than all of those. Now, the power is huge, but as well as that, there's the torque. 553 foot-pounds of torque. Now, I'm aware that that, as a figure, might not mean much to many people, but if I told you it was 10 foot-pounds of torque off of the pace of a McLaren 720S, then you might start to understand just how quick this thing is. This thing also has heated seats, both in the front and in the back. And up front here, if I push this button, I'm now getting a full body massage. Then there's the other luxuries, things like the ionic air conditioning system, which can plumb through a scented fragrance into the cabin whilst you're driving along. And then lane assist, adaptive cruise control, radar cruise control, heated steering wheel. This is 7 Series luxury level now. And there is, of course, one last figure that we need to mention when we're talking about the power and capability of this car, and that is the 0 to 60 time. I'm just going to come out with it. It's 3.2 seconds, 0 to 62. Now that's the official stat that BMW give. 0 to 62 miles an hour, or 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 3.2 seconds. Now that's fast, but believe it or not, it's been proven already. In fact, my good friend Joe Achilles did a test with one of those clever GPS V-Box things, and it actually achieved 0 to 62 in 2.9 seconds. 2.9 seconds. I just have to remind you again, this is a 4-door saloon. Ultimately, a family car. It's got Isofix in the back to put your kids' seats in. Those rear seats actually fold down, so you could ultimately use this for an IKEA run. You could put a flat pack wardrobe in the back and then drive from 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds and then max out at 190 miles an hour on the German Autobahn. Now, to help put all that power down, of course, BMW now has the M5 with xDrive. That ultimately means 4-wheel drive. But it's not permanent 4-wheel drive, because whilst you're driving along, amongst many of the other driving options you've got, you can switch it to rear-wheel drive only. So you can drive this thing as M5 drivers have been driving their M5s for, well, since the E28 came out in 1984. The powertrain in here goes through a ZF8 gearbox. Now, previously, I've moaned about the ZF8 gearbox, not because there's anything wrong with it, not at all. It's a fantastic bit of kit. What I've moaned about historically is the fact that it's in an M car. Previously, M cars like the M3 and the M5, they've always had either the option of a 6-speed manual gearbox or a sequential paddle shift gearbox, something like an SMG box or a DCT, a dual clutch transmission. In here though, it's got the ZF8. Now, in the M3 and the M4, that is a bit upsetting, I'll be honest, because it's not quite as aggressive and fast as I'd want it to be. But in here, dare I say it, I'm going to eat my words slightly. It actually does make sense. You've got the option to drive it in full manual mode with the paddles. You've also got the option to just knock it across with a hit of a knob, and you're in full auto, driving along like you would be in any other car with an automatic gearbox. It does just make sense. Now, as with all BMWs, as with all cars really, luxury manufacturers, you've got a list of options and different things that you can spec on a car, given how much performance you want, what sort of gadgets you want inside. This thing has got a pretty good list. It's not the top spec M5, that would be left down to the CS. This is just the M5 Competition, but believe it or not, the M5 Competition is now the base model M5 that you can buy in the UK. That's due to bizarre emissions EU laws. Now, with the options that are put on this particular car, it's not cheap. In fact, it's £103,000. Now, with the CS model, that jumps up considerably, but then you are getting things like carbon ceramic brakes and various other gadgets and lightweight components. This, I feel, is everything I would want an M5 to be. I don't necessarily feel the need for carbon ceramic brakes. Yes, they're going to certainly help you out if you're on track, but The likelihood of you taking your M5 on a track day, probably not going to happen that often. And having done some fast road driving in this, I'd say the brakes feel fine. Now this is the facelifted version of this latest iteration of the M5. And with that have been some fairly unusual changes, some welcomed and some not so much. The big difference is a slight change to the engine map. The engine map in this now, again to comply with new emissions laws, means that it doesn't do the rumbles, the pops, crackles and bangs that some people really like in the older, earlier shaped models of the M5. For me, it's no bad thing. I can't stand fabricated pops, bangs and any noises. Now, as standard in the car, you've of course got multiple driver modes and settings. You've got the configurable buttons, M1 and M2, so you can save your own driving presets. So you can have a track-focused driving mode. For me personally, I found in M1, which is my preset, it puts the engine into maximum power mode, however keeps the suspension nice and soft. It also keeps the steering in comfort mode as well. The steering, I have to say, in this thing is probably the sharpest I've felt in a car of this size. Genuinely, we're into supercar precision with the way that it turns. Everything, of course, as you are probably aware, is drive-by-wire now, so throttle, brake pedal and steering, it's all by wire. That, of course, if you're really comparing it to older versions of the M5 or older performance cars, then that is going to take away from the feel of a car. Ultimately, this is a necessary evil now, it's just something we'll have to get used to. And to be honest with you, in here, it's not too intrusive at all, it's actually quite pleasant. We're approaching the end of the year, 2021 at the time of recording this, and it's got me thinking about all the cars that I've driven this year. Could this be the best one? Yeah. Ultimately, yeah. I'm driving along in a luxurious, comfortable 5 Series with loads of legroom here. If I had a passenger in the back, they'd have loads of legroom. You can't see it, you're not aware of it, but right now I'm getting a whole body massage. If I wasn't talking to you now, I'd be listening to my music through a premium hardened sound system. I'm using radar control, lane assist. If I wanted to take a phone call, I could do that now, do it with perfect sound quality, in perfect comfort, in the perfect car, despite having the capability of driving at, give or take, 200 miles an hour. How does it get any better than an M5? How does it get any better than an M5? I mean, that's a genuine question. I would make one change, actually. Besides the silly plumbed-in sound. If they did this as an estate version, that'd be a cool car. So beyond the fact that the M5 is brilliant because it's so luxurious and comfortable, and yet so blisteringly fast, gives you the capability to do almost anything you'd want to do in the car. The thing that I really like about the M5 is the fact that to the vast majority of people, it's just another family car. It just blends in. It's what I like to call stealth wealth. Those that know what they're looking at, know what they're looking at. And those that don't, well, they don't care. And that to me is utter bliss. You've got the ability to be as fast as a 911 Turbo, as impressive and as sprightly as a V10 Audi R8, and yet you also have the ability to just disappear and blend in. This is without a doubt, the car of the year for me. And I'll be honest with you, I think I probably would have come to the same conclusion if I were doing this review in January rather than December. Because how on earth can you top this? Thanks for watching. It's wonderful having you here. We're making more of these videos as time goes on, so keep an eye on the YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed, make sure you've hit that little bell notification. And all being well, we'll see you again very soon.